You ever hear something so devastating that time just stops? Something so calculated, so deliberately cruel, that you can feel your entire world cracking apart word by word. I remember that moment in Judge Patricia Holloway's courtroom like it's happening right now. The fluorescent lights humming overhead, the smell of old wood and stale coffee, my ex-husband Vincent Carrera standing there in his perfectly pressed navy suit, looking the judge straight in the eye with that same confident smile that once made me fall in love with him. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Your Honor, he said, his voice steady and practiced. Diana is emotionally unstable and completely unfit to have primary custody of our son. She's manipulative, vindictive, and frankly dangerous to a child's psychological development. He paused, letting those words sink into the silent courtroom like poison into an open wound. I have recordings that prove she's been coaching our 8-year-old son against me, trying to turn him into her personal weapon in this custody battle. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was watching Judge Holloway nod thoughtfully, like she was actually considering his lies as truth. The worst part was seeing my lawyer, Patricia Moon, frantically shuffling through papers, clearly caught off guard by allegations she'd never heard before. The worst part was feeling my 8-year-old son Gabriel's small hand squeeze mine under the table, and knowing that in that moment, he understood exactly what his father was trying to do. You see, this wasn't just about custody, this was about control. This was about a man who couldn't stand the fact that I had finally found the courage to leave him, finally stopped making excuses for his behavior, finally stopped pretending that his verbal abuse was just stress from work or going through a rough patch. Vincent Carrera was the kind of man who believed that winning meant making sure the other person lost everything. And in family court in Millbrook County, Pennsylvania, he was about to find out just how far he was willing to go to destroy me. I sat there in that cold wooden chair, wearing the most professional outfit I owned, a black blazer I'd bought on sale 3 years ago and had worn to every important meeting since, feeling smaller than I'd ever felt in my life. My hands were shaking so badly I had to clasp them together to keep anyone from noticing. But Gabriel noticed. He always noticed everything. Your Honor, Vincent continued, pulling out his phone with theatrical precision. I have audio recordings of Diana badmouthing me to our son, telling him that Daddy doesn't love him anymore, that Daddy chose his new girlfriend over his family. She's been systematically alienating my child against me for months. The lie was so smooth, so believable, so perfectly crafted that for a moment I wondered if I was losing my mind. Had I said those things? Had I somehow forgotten? But then I remembered the truth. The real truth that Vincent was so desperately trying to bury. I remembered the nights when Gabriel would crawl into my bed, tears streaming down his face, asking why Daddy yelled at Mommy so much. I remembered the morning Gabriel drew a picture at school of our family, and when his teacher asked him about it, he said, "That's Mommy crying and Daddy being mad again." I remembered the pediatrician's appointment where Gabriel told Dr. Sarah Martinez that sometimes his tummy hurt when Daddy came home because the house gets scary. But most of all, I remembered something Vincent didn't know Gabriel had done. Something he had no idea was coming. Something that was about to change everything in that courtroom and expose the real truth about who was actually unfit to be a parent. You see, my son Gabriel isn't just smart. He's observant in a way that breaks your heart. At 8 years old, he'd already learned to read the room, to sense when the adults around him were lying, to protect himself in ways no child should ever have to learn. And in the weeks leading up to this custody hearing, Gabriel had been asking me questions. Careful questions. Specific questions. Questions that made me realize he knew far more about what was happening than I'd given him credit for. Vincent thought he was so clever, standing there in his expensive suit, painting me as the villain in our story. He thought his charm and his lawyer's aggressive tactics would be enough to convince Judge Holloway that I was everything he claimed I was. He thought Gabriel was too young to understand what was really happening, too innocent to see through his manipulation. He was wrong. Dead wrong. Because in about 30 minutes, Gabriel was going to walk up to that judge's bench, request permission to speak, and play a recording that would flip this entire hearing upside down. A recording that Vincent had no idea existed. A recording that would reveal exactly who the real manipulator was in our family. A recording that would show the judge, and everyone else in that courtroom, what Vincent Carrera was really like, when he thought nobody was listening. And the most beautiful part? Gabriel had done it all on his own. No coaching from me, no manipulation, no turning him into a weapon. Just a brave little boy who had finally decided he was tired of watching his father lie about his mother, tired of pretending that the man, who had made their home a place of fear and tension, was the victim in this story. But I'm getting ahead of myself. You need to understand how we got to this moment. You need to know who Vincent really was behind that charming smile and expensive suit. You need to understand what our marriage was really like, what our divorce had become, and why Gabriel felt like he had no choice but to become the voice of truth in a room full of lies. Because this story isn't just about a custody battle. It's about a woman who spent years being told she was crazy, oversensitive, and unfit. It's about a child who loved both his parents, but refused to stay silent when one of them tried to destroy the other. And it's about the moment when truth finally had its day in court, delivered by the smallest, bravest voice in the room. So let me take you back to the beginning, to where this all started, and show you exactly how we ended up in Judge Holloway's courtroom with my 8-year-old son holding the key to everything. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Before I became the woman sitting in that courtroom fighting for my son, before I became someone Vincent could dismiss as unstable and unfit, I was Diana Sophia Reeves. I was a 29-year-old elementary school music teacher at Maplewood Elementary in the small town of Brookhaven, Pennsylvania. I was the woman who sang lullabies while grading papers late into the night, who kept a guitar in the corner of my classroom for impromptu sing-alongs, who believed that every child deserved to feel the magic of music. I was someone who baked cookies for my neighbors when they were sick, who never missed a Sunday dinner at my parents' house, who still called my grandmother Rosa every Tuesday evening just to hear her stories about growing up in Puerto Rico. I was the kind of person who cried during commercials about rescue dogs and who stopped to help strangers change flat tires even. When I was running late, my friends would tell you I was the reliable one, the one who remembered everyone's birthdays, who showed up with soup when you had the flu, who listened without judgment when you needed to vent about your terrible boss or your complicated love life. My sister Carmen used to joke that I was born with a helper complex, always putting everyone else's needs before my own, always believing the best in people even when they showed me otherwise. I lived in a small 2-bedroom apartment above Martelli's Italian restaurant on Elm Street, where the smell of garlic and basil drifted up through my floorboards every evening around dinner time. Mrs. Martelli, who owned the place with her husband Tony, treated me like family. She'd knock on my door with leftover lasagna and unsolicited advice about my love life, shaking her head and muttering in Italian about how I was too good for my own good. My apartment was filled with plants I somehow managed to keep alive, books stacked on every available surface, and a collection of vintage vinyl records I'd been gathering since college. I had dreams of maybe starting a music therapy program for kids, maybe traveling to teach English in Costa Rica for a summer, maybe learning to play the piano well enough to accompany myself when I sang. I wasn't particularly ambitious in the way some people measure ambition. I didn't want to be rich or famous or powerful. I wanted to matter. I wanted to make a difference in kids' lives, to be the teacher they remembered fondly when they were adults, to create a home filled with laughter and music and the kind of unconditional love I'd grown up with. My parents, Miguel and Elena Reeves, had immigrated from Colombia when I was 2 years old. They worked multiple jobs to give Carmen and me opportunities they'd never had. Dad drove trucks for a logistics company during the week and painted houses on weekends. Mom cleaned offices at night and worked as a seamstress during the day. They never complained, never made us feel like their sacrifices were a burden, but I knew. I saw how tired they were, how they counted every penny, how they wore the same clothes for years so Carmen and I could have new school supplies. That's probably why I was so careful with money, so grateful for what I had, so determined to never take anything for granted. I drove a 2015 Honda Civic that I'd bought used and maintained religiously. I shopped at thrift stores and farmers markets. I made my own coffee instead of buying it, packed lunches instead of eating out, and found joy in simple pleasures like library books and long walks in Riverside Park. I was also deeply romantic in the old-fashioned sense. I believed in soulmates and forever love and growing old with someone who made you laugh every day. I believed that if you were kind enough, patient enough, and loving enough, you could build something beautiful with another person. I believed that good things happened to good people, that honesty mattered more than cleverness, and that love really could conquer most problems. Looking back now, I can see how naive that made me, how vulnerable, how easy it was for someone like Vincent to see those qualities and recognize them not as strengths, but as weaknesses he could exploit. I was the kind of woman who gave people the benefit of the doubt, who made excuses for behavior that should have been deal breakers, who believed that if someone treated you badly, it was probably because they were hurting inside and just needed more love and patience. I was the woman who thought that if you just tried hard enough, if you loved deeply enough, if you sacrificed enough of yourself, you could heal another person's wounds and help them become their best self. My students at Maplewood Elementary adored me, not because I was the cool teacher who let them get away with things, but because I saw them, really saw them. I knew that Jessica Martinez got quiet when her parents were fighting again. I knew that Tommy Chen acted out when he was struggling with reading. I knew that little Aisha Johnson sang so beautifully during music class because it was the only time she felt confident and free. I had been teaching for 6 years when I met Vincent, and I was good at what I did. Not just competent, good. I had that rare gift for connecting with children, for making them feel safe enough to be themselves, creative enough to try new things, and brave enough to perform in front of others. Parents requested me specifically for their kids. Other teachers came to me for advice about reaching difficult students. My principal, Dr. Martha Caldwell, had mentioned more than once that I should consider getting my master's degree in educational leadership, that I had the qualities to be an administrator someday, but I loved being in the classroom too much to imagine sitting in an office all day pushing papers. I volunteered with the church youth choir on Wednesday evenings and helped organize the annual spring festival that raised money for new playground equipment. I was involved, connected, purposeful. I had a life that made sense, relationships that nourished me, work that felt meaningful. I was also lonely sometimes, especially on Friday nights when Carmen was out with her fiancé Ricardo and my friends were coupled up and busy with their own lives. I longed for someone to share morning coffee with, someone to call when something funny happened during my day, someone to plan weekend adventures with. I wanted what my parents had, that easy partnership where they finished each other's sentences and laughed at inside jokes that Carmen and I didn't understand. I wanted someone who would drive to the store at 10 p.m. when I was sick and needed medicine. Someone who would listen to me practice new songs for my students. Someone who would hold my hand during scary movies and remember how I liked my tea. I thought I was ready for love. I thought I knew what healthy relationships looked like because I'd grown up watching my parents navigate 30 years of marriage with respect, humor, and genuine affection. I thought my experience working with children meant I was a good judge of character, that I could spot manipulation and dishonesty from a mile away. I was wrong about almost everything, but I'm getting ahead of myself again. You need to know about the woman I was before Vincent Carrera walked into Riverside Community Center that October evening in 2019 and turned my carefully ordered world upside down. You need to understand that I wasn't some broken, desperate woman looking for anyone to rescue me. I was whole. I was happy. I was exactly who I was supposed to be. And that's probably why I never saw him coming. October 15th, 2019. I remember the date because it was the night of the Brookhaven Community Arts Festival, an event I'd been helping organize for 3 months. The festival was held at Riverside Community Center, and I was there early, setting up the sound system for the children's choir performance that would open the evening. My students had been practicing for weeks, and I was both nervous and excited to see them shine. I was wrestling with a particularly stubborn microphone cable when I heard someone clear their throat behind me. "Looks like you could use an extra pair of hands." The voice was warm, confident, with just a hint of amusement. I turned around to find a man in his early 30s with dark hair, kind brown eyes, and a smile that seemed to light up the entire room. "I'm Vincent," he said, extending his hand. "Vincent Carrera. I'm new to town, and I heard this was the place to be tonight." His handshake was firm but not aggressive, and when he smiled, little crinkles appeared at the corners of his eyes. He was wearing a navy blue sweater that looked expensive but not flashy, dark jeans, and boots that suggested he was practical but still cared about his appearance. "Diana," I replied, feeling suddenly self-conscious about my paint-stained cardigan and the fact that my hair was escaping from its ponytail in about 12 different directions. "And yes, I could definitely use some help with this sound system. Are you technically inclined or are you just being polite?" He laughed, a genuine sound that made my stomach do this little flip I hadn't felt in years. "I'm actually a project manager for a tech consulting firm, so I speak fluent troubleshooting. May I?" He gestured toward the tangle of cables, and I stepped aside, watching as he quickly identified the problem and had the system working in less than 5 minutes. "You're a lifesaver," I said, testing the microphone. My students would have been devastated if they couldn't perform tonight. They've been practicing this little light of mine for weeks, and some of them have family coming specifically to hear them sing. "Music teacher?" he asked, and when I nodded, his smile grew even wider. "That's incredible. I have so much respect for teachers. You're shaping the next generation, creating memories that'll last forever. That has to be the most important job in the world." Most people, when they found out I was a teacher, either made jokes about having summers off or looked slightly disappointed, like I'd somehow failed to reach my potential. Vincent's reaction was different. He seemed genuinely impressed, interested. Like teaching elementary school music was as prestigious as being a brain surgeon. We talked while I finished setting up, and I found myself laughing more than I had in months. Vincent had this way of listening that made you feel like you were the most fascinating person he'd ever met. When I mentioned that I was nervous about the performance, he said, "If those kids are half as passionate about music as their teacher obviously is, they're going to be amazing." The performance went perfectly. My students sang like angels, their faces glowing with pride when the audience erupted in applause. I was beaming, wiping away happy tears, when I felt a tap on my shoulder. Vincent was standing there with a small bouquet of sunflowers he'd apparently bought from one of the vendors. "For the maestro," he said with a theatrical bow that made me laugh. "Those kids were incredible, but watching you watch them was even better. You light up when you see them succeed." I'd never had anyone notice that before, the way I felt when my students accomplished something they'd worked hard for. The way their joy became my joy, their pride became my pride. Vincent saw it, understood it, and appreciated it. In that moment, I felt seen in a way I'd never experienced before. After the festival, he asked if I'd like to get coffee. We ended up at Moonrise Cafe on Main Street, talking until they kicked us out at closing time. Vincent told me he'd just moved to Brookhaven after getting a promotion that allowed him to work remotely. He'd grown up in Philadelphia, had a degree in business management from Temple University, and had chosen our small town specifically because he was tired of city life and wanted somewhere peaceful to put down roots. "I've been looking for a place that feels like home," he said, stirring sugar into his third cup of coffee. "Somewhere I could imagine raising a family someday, you know? The kind of town where everyone knows each other's names and kids can ride their bikes without their parents worrying." He asked about my students, my family, my dreams. He listened intently when I told him about my parents' immigration story, nodding respectfully when I explained how hard they'd worked to give Carmen and me opportunities. When I mentioned my grandmother Rosa and her Tuesday evening phone calls, he said, "She sounds like an amazing woman. I'd love to meet her someday." The way he said, "someday," made my heart skip. Like he was already imagining a future that included me, that included being integrated into my family and my life. Over the next few weeks, Vincent became a regular part of my routine. He'd show up at the school sometimes when I was staying late to prepare for concerts, bringing me dinner from Martelli's or helping me move equipment. He never made me feel guilty for working long hours or being passionate about my job. Instead, he seemed fascinated by what I did. "Watching you with those kids is like watching magic happen," he said one evening as we loaded chairs after a parent concert. "You make them believe they can do anything. Do you know how rare that is?" He integrated himself into my life so seamlessly that it felt natural, inevitable. He charmed Mrs. Martelli by speaking to her in the broken Italian he'd learned during a college semester abroad. He won over my parents by asking thoughtful questions about their experiences immigrating to America and listening to their stories with genuine interest. He even impressed Carmen, who was notoriously skeptical of the Dom men I dated. "He's different," she told me after Vincent had joined us for Sunday dinner and spent an hour helping Dad fix the back porch railing. "He doesn't just tolerate your family, he actually seems to enjoy us. And he looks at you like you hung the moon." Vincent had this way of making everything feel special. A quick trip to the grocery store became an adventure when he was with me, complete with silly debates about the best type of pasta sauce and impromptu dance parties in the cereal aisle when a good song came over the speakers. He left little notes in my car, brought me flowers for no reason, and remembered every small detail I shared with him. When I mentioned that I missed the live music scene from my college days, he surprised me with tickets to see a folk duo perform at a small venue in Lancaster. When I caught a cold in November, he showed up with homemade chicken soup and stayed to take care of me even though I protested that he'd get sick too. "I'm not going anywhere," he said, settling in on my couch with a stack of movies and enough tissues to supply a small army. "Besides, who else is going to make sure you actually rest instead of grading papers from your sickbed?" He was right. I probably would have spent the day grading, but instead, we watched old romantic comedies, and he made me laugh until my sides hurt. When I dozed off against his shoulder, I woke up to find him reading one of my books, careful not to move and disturb my sleep. By December, we were officially together, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Vincent fit into my life like a piece I didn't even know was missing. He came to every school concert, charming my students and impressing their parents. He joined me for Christmas dinner with my family, bringing thoughtful gifts and staying late to help with dishes. On New Year's Eve, as we watched fireworks over Riverside Park, he pulled me close and said, "This year changed my life. You changed my life, Diana. I can't imagine being anywhere else but right here with you." I believed him completely. Why wouldn't I? He showed up consistently, treated me with respect and affection, and seemed to genuinely admire everything about me that previous boyfriends had found too much. My dedication to my students, my close relationship with my family, my emotional investment in everything I cared about. When we moved in together the following spring, it felt like the logical next step in what was clearly becoming a forever kind of love. Vincent found a beautiful house on Maple Avenue with a big front porch and a yard perfect for barbecues and maybe someday, children playing. "I can see our life here," he said as we signed the lease, his arm around my waist as we stood in what would become our living room. I can see Sunday mornings with coffee and crossword puzzles, dinner parties with your family, maybe a couple of kids running around this yard someday. I could see it too. In fact, I could hardly imagine anything else. Vincent Carrera had become my present and my future, the answer to prayers I'd been whispering since I was old enough to dream about love. Looking back now, I can see how perfectly orchestrated it all was. How he said exactly what I needed to. Here became exactly who I needed him to be. But in those golden months, it felt like the most authentic love story ever written. It felt like coming home. The first crack appeared on a Tuesday in September, almost a year after we'd moved in together. I was in the kitchen grading spelling tests when Vincent came home from what he'd said was a client meeting in Harrisburg. He was later than expected, and I'd kept dinner warm in the oven, his favorite lasagna that I'd spent 2 hours making from scratch. "How was your meeting?" I asked, getting up to heat his plate. That's when I noticed his shirt was wrinkled in, a way that suggested he'd been sitting for hours, but there was a faint smudge of what looked like lipstick on his collar. "Fine," he said curtly, loosening his tie with more force than necessary. "Just long, boring client stuff." When I pointed out the mark on his shirt, his explanation came too quickly, too rehearsed. Must have been from the waitress at lunch. She was leaning over the table to refill my coffee. Something in his tone made me pause. Vincent was usually eager to share details about his work, often spending dinner telling me funny stories about difficult clients or breakthrough moments with his team. This clipped, dismissive response felt foreign, like talking to a stranger wearing my boyfriend's face. "Are you okay?" I asked, reaching out to touch his arm. "You seem stressed." He pulled away, just slightly, but enough that I noticed. "I'm fine, Diana. God, you don't have to analyze everything. Can a person just be tired without you turning it into some deep emotional conversation?" The words stung, partly because they were so unexpected, and partly because they felt deliberately cruel. In all our time together, Vincent had never spoken to me like that. He'd never made me feel like my concern was unwelcome or excessive. "I'm sorry," I said automatically, even though I wasn't sure what I was apologizing for. "I was just asking." He softened immediately, crossing the kitchen to pull me into a hug. "No, I'm sorry. You're right, I am stressed. This new contract is more complicated than I expected, and I took it out on you. That's not fair." He kissed the top of my head, and for a moment, everything felt normal again. "Thank you for keeping dinner warm. You're too good to me." I convinced myself it was an isolated incident. Everyone had bad days. Everyone snapped sometimes when they were overwhelmed with work pressure. But over the next few weeks, I started noticing other small changes that individually seemed insignificant, but together created a pattern I couldn't quite ignore. Vincent began working later more frequently, often not coming home until after 9 or 10 at night. When I suggested we grab dinner together before he got too busy, he'd remind me about the big project he was managing, speaking to me like I was being unreasonable for wanting to spend time with my own boyfriend. His phone, which used to sit casually on the kitchen counter, now went everywhere with him, even to the bathroom. When it buzzed during dinner, he'd grab it immediately, his face tightening with concentration as he read messages he never shared with me. Work stuff became his standard explanation for everything. Late nights, weekend calls, the way he'd step onto the porch to take certain phone calls, the new password protection on his laptop that he claimed was required by his company's new security protocols. The romance that had defined our early relationship began to feel forced, performative. Vincent still brought me flowers, but now they felt like an apology for something I couldn't name, rather than a spontaneous expression of affection. He still said, "I love you," every night, but the words came at scheduled moments, before bed, when leaving for work, like items on a checklist rather than genuine sentiment. Our physical intimacy changed too. Vincent had always been attentive, present, connected when we were together. Now he seemed distracted even during our most intimate moments, like his mind was somewhere else entirely. Afterward, instead of our usual pillow talk, he'd immediately reach for his phone or find a reason to get up and shower. I started doubting my own perceptions. Was I being paranoid? Needy? Too sensitive? Vincent had always praised my emotional intelligence, my intuition about people, but now I wondered if those qualities were actually flaws that made me see problems where none existed. When I tried to talk to him about feeling disconnected, he'd flip the script in ways that left me confused and apologetic. "I've been working 16-hour days trying to build a future for us," he'd say, his voice heavy with injured martyrdom. "I thought you'd be proud of my dedication, not criticizing me for it." "I'm not criticizing," I'd start, but he'd cut me off. "It feels like criticism, Diana. It feels like no matter what I do, it's not enough for you. I can't work less because then you'd worry about money. I can't work more because then you feel neglected. I'm trying to find the balance, but you're not making it easy." These conversations always ended with me apologizing and him graciously forgiving me for being unreasonable. I'd walk away feeling like the problem in our relationship, like my expectations were somehow both too high and too low, like I was lucky he was patient enough to put up with my neediness. The gaslighting was so subtle, so skillfully executed, that I didn't recognize it for what it was. Instead, I internalized his version of events. I was too demanding. I was reading too much into innocent changes. I needed to be more supportive of his career ambitions and less focused on my own emotional needs. I started editing myself around him, choosing my words more carefully, analyzing my own reactions before expressing them. If I felt hurt by something he said, I'd spend hours wondering if my feelings were valid or if I was being oversensitive. If I missed him during his long work days, I'd remind myself that he was working hard for our future and that complaining would make me seem selfish. My friends began commenting on the changes they saw in me. "You seem anxious lately," Carmen observed during one of our sister coffee dates. "Is everything okay with Vincent?" "Everything's fine," I insisted, and mostly believed it. "He's just busy with work. It's temporary." But Carmen knew me too well. "You used to light up when you talked about him. Now you sound like you're trying to convince yourself everything is okay." I deflected her concerns, changing the subject to her wedding planning, but her words echoed in my mind for days. Was I trying to convince myself? And if so, what was I trying not to see? The breaking point of this phase came in November, during my birthday dinner at Romano's, the Italian restaurant where Vincent had taken me for our 6-month anniversary. I'd been looking forward to the evening for weeks, hoping it might recapture some of the magic we seemed to have lost. Vincent was distracted throughout dinner, checking his phone repeatedly despite my gentle reminders that it was supposed to be our special night. When the waiter brought out the chocolate cake I'd mentioned wanting to try, Vincent barely looked up from typing a text message. "Vincent?" I said quietly. "Could you please put the phone away? Just for tonight?" He looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Cold, calculating, almost contemptuous. "Diana, I'm handling a crisis with the Morrison account. Do you want me to lose a 6-figure contract because you need my undivided attention for dessert?" The words were delivered with surgical precision, designed to make me feel small and selfish. Other diners turned to look at us, and I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment. "I just thought," I began. "You thought what? That your birthday dinner is more important than my career? Than our financial security?" He shook his head like I was a child who'd disappointed him. "I'm working this hard for us, Diana. For our future. But if you can't see that, if you're going to make me feel guilty for being ambitious, then maybe we need to reconsider what we want from this relationship." I sat there speechless, cake untouched, feeling like I'd been slapped. This wasn't the man who'd courted me with sunflowers and homemade soup. This wasn't the man who'd told me I lit up rooms and made children believe in magic. This was someone else entirely. Someone who could make me feel grateful for scraps of attention and apologetic for wanting basic respect. That night, lying in bed next to him while he scrolled through emails on his phone, I finally admitted to myself what I'd been trying not to see. Vincent was changing. Or maybe he wasn't changing at all. Maybe he was just finally showing me who he'd always been underneath the charm and romance. But even then, even with that realization settling into my chest like a stone, I told myself it was fixable. We just needed to communicate better. I needed to be more understanding of his work pressure. We needed to find our way back to each other. I had no idea how much further we had to fall. February 14th, 2022. Valentine's Day. The irony of the date still makes my stomach turn. I'd been planning for weeks to surprise Vincent with a romantic dinner at home, complete with his favorite wine, candles, and the salmon dish he'd raved about when we'd had it at a restaurant in Philadelphia months earlier. I'd even taken a half day from school to prepare everything perfectly. I was 8 months pregnant with Gabriel at the time, moving slowly but determined to recreate some of the romance we'd lost over the past year. My belly was so big I could barely see my feet, and I'd been having those practice contractions that made me stop and breathe through them. But I was excited about the evening. Maybe this would be the reset we needed before the baby came. Vincent had been increasingly absent throughout my pregnancy, claiming that work demands were intensifying as he tried to secure our financial future before becoming a father. His late nights had become overnight trips. His weekend work sessions had become full disappearances from Friday evening to Sunday night. When I'd expressed concern about him missing my doctor's appointments, he'd reminded me that someone had to pay for all those medical bills. "I'm building something for our family," he'd say whenever I brought up feeling alone during what should have been the most connected time of our lives. "Would you rather I be here holding your hand while we go bankrupt, or working to make sure our son has everything he needs?" But that Valentine's evening I was hopeful. I'd set the table with the good china we'd gotten as a housewarming gift, arranged roses from the florist on Elm Street, and spent 3 hours preparing a meal that should have taken one. Every few minutes I had to stop and lean against the counter as another practice contraction rolled through me, but I pushed through the discomfort because this felt important. This felt like it might save us. Vincent was supposed to be home by 6. By 7, the salmon was overcooked and the candles had burned down to stubs. By 8, I was calling his phone and getting voicemail. By 9, I was sitting at our beautifully set table, still in the red maternity dress I'd bought specifically for the occasion, crying into the wilted salad. He finally walked through the door at 10:47 p.m. I know the exact time because I'd been watching the clock on the microwave, each minute feeling like evidence of how little I mattered to him anymore. "Diana? What's all this?" he asked, surveying the romantic dinner setup with what looked like annoyance rather than appreciation. "It's Valentine's Day," I said quietly, struggling to stand up from the chair. My back was killing me, and Gabriel was kicking like he was training for the Olympics. "I made your favorite dinner. I've been waiting for you." Vincent loosened his tie and sighed heavily, like coming home to his pregnant girlfriend was an inconvenience he hadn't expected. "I told you I had the Brennan Industries presentation tonight. This is exactly what I'm talking about, Diana. You don't listen. You just decide what you want and expect me to drop everything to accommodate you." "You didn't tell me about any presentation," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You said you'd be home by 6. I asked you this morning if you had any plans tonight, and you said no." "I absolutely told you about Brennan Industries," he snapped, his voice taking on that cold, authoritative tone that had become increasingly familiar. "Maybe if you paid attention to anything other than baby preparations and school functions, you'd remember important conversations about my career." That's when I noticed it. The smell. Perfume that definitely wasn't mine, mixed with alcohol and something else I couldn't identify. His shirt was untucked, his hair slightly messed, and there was a smudge of what looked like foundation on his collar. "Where were you, really?" I asked, the words coming out before I could stop them. Vincent's expression shifted in a way that made my blood run cold. The mask of irritated professionalism slipped, and underneath was something I'd never seen before: contempt. Pure, undisguised contempt. "Are you seriously questioning me right now?" His voice was dangerously quiet. "I'm working 18-hour days to support this family, and you're standing here like some pathetic housewife demanding to know where I've been?" "I'm not demanding anything," I said, tears starting to fall. "I just made dinner and waited for you, and I smell perfume on your clothes, and I don't understand what's happening to us." "What's happening?" Vincent said, stepping closer in a way that felt intimidating rather than intimate, "is that you've become exactly what I was afraid you'd become. Needy, paranoid, controlling. Do you think this is attractive? Do you think any man wants to come home to this kind of interrogation?" Another contraction hit me then, stronger than the others, and I had to grab the back of the chair to steady myself. Instead of concern, Vincent's face showed irritation. "Oh, come on, Diana. Don't be dramatic. You've been having those fake contractions for weeks. The doctor said they're completely normal." "They're not fake," I managed to say through gritted teeth. "And they're getting stronger." "Everything is always stronger with you. Everything is always more intense, more urgent, more dramatic than it needs to be." He shook his head like I was a disappointing student who couldn't grasp a simple concept. "This is exactly why I need space to think about our relationship." The words hit me like a physical blow. "Space? What do you mean, space?" "I mean, I need to figure out if this is what I really want. If you're who I really want to spend my life with. Because honestly, Diana, I don't know if I can handle this level of neediness and suspicion for the next 50 years. I felt the world tilt sideways. "Vincent, I'm having your baby in 4 weeks. What are you saying?" "I'm saying that maybe we rushed into this. Maybe we made decisions based on emotion instead of logic. Maybe we're just not compatible in the ways that matter." He was speaking calmly now, clinically, like he was delivering a business presentation about why our relationship was a failed investment. "You don't mean that," I whispered, one hand on my belly, the other still gripping the chair as another contraction built. "You're just stressed about work and the baby coming. We can work through this." Vincent laughed then, a sound that was somehow worse than his anger. "Work through what, Diana? Your jealousy? Your constant need for reassurance? Your inability to understand that I have responsibilities beyond making you feel special every second of every day?" "I don't need to feel special every second," I said, my voice breaking. "I just need to feel like I matter to you, like we matter to you." "And there it is," Vincent said, pointing at me like I'd just proven his point. "Everything has to be about feelings with you. Everything has to be analyzed and discussed and validated. Do you know how exhausting that is? Do you know what it's like to live with someone who turns every conversation into an emotional crisis?" Another contraction, stronger than before, and this time I couldn't hide the pain. I doubled over, breathing hard, and felt a warm trickle of fluid down my legs. "Vincent," I gasped. "I think my water just broke." He looked at me with undisguised disgust. "Of course it did. Of course you're having the baby right now, in the middle of this conversation when I'm trying to have an adult discussion about our future." "This isn't something I'm controlling," I said, panic starting to set in. As I realized what was happening, "The baby is coming. We need to get to the hospital." "We need to get to the hospital," Vincent repeated mockingly. "See? This is what I'm talking about. Everything is always about what we need to do for you, what we need to do for the baby." "When? Do I get to think about what I need?" I stared at him in disbelief. I was in labor, our son was about to be born, and he was making it about himself. "What you need. Vincent, your son is being born. Can't your existential crisis wait until after Gabriel is safely here? Don't you dare tell me what can and can't. Wait, he snarled. And for the first time in our relationship, I was actually afraid of him. I'm not your servant, Diana. I'm not here to jump every time you snap your fingers. The next contraction was so intense I couldn't speak through it. When it passed, I looked up to find Vincent standing in the kitchen doorway, car keys in his hand, looking at me like I was a problem he needed to solve rather than the woman carrying his child. Fine, he said finally. Let's go to the hospital. But this conversation isn't over. After the baby comes, we're going to have some serious discussions about what this relationship is going to look like going forward. Because I won't live like this anymore. The drive to Brookhaven General Hospital was a nightmare of silence, broken only by my breathing through contractions and Vincent's sighs of irritation every time I made any sound of pain. When we reached the emergency entrance, he dropped me off at the door and went to park the car, leaving me to waddle into the maternity ward alone. Gabriel was born 6 hours later, after a labor that felt both endless and too fast. Vincent was there for the actual birth, playing the role of devoted father for the nurses and doctors. But the moment we were alone, the mask slipped again. I hope this makes you happy, he said, staring at our newborn son with something that looked more like resentment than love. I hope this was worth destroying what we had. As I held Gabriel against my chest, this tiny, perfect person who'd done nothing wrong except be born to parents who were falling apart, I realized that the man I'd fallen in love with had never really existed. He'd been a character Vincent had played, a role he'd performed until he got what he wanted. Now that I was trapped, pregnant, then a new mother, financially dependent on him, he didn't need to pretend anymore. The worst part wasn't even his cruelty. It was the way he made me feel like I deserved it, like my expectations of love and partnership during the most vulnerable time of my life were unreasonable demands that proved how selfish and needy I was. But I had Gabriel now. And as I looked at his tiny face, I made a promise that I would figure out how to protect him from the toxicity that had infected our home. I just had no idea how much worse things were about to get. The first 3 months after Gabriel was born were the loneliest period of my life. Vincent went back to work 2 days after we came home from the hospital, claiming he couldn't afford to take paternity leave because of critical projects that couldn't wait. I was left alone with a newborn, still recovering from a difficult delivery, trying to figure out how to be a mother while my world crumbled around me. Vincent's absences became even longer and more frequent. He'd leave for work before Gabriel and I woke up and return after we'd both gone to bed. On weekends, he'd disappear for hours, claiming he needed to decompress from the stress of providing for a family. When I asked if he wanted to hold Gabriel or help with feeding time, he'd remind me that he was already doing his part by working to support us financially. I'm not built for the baby stuff, he'd say, waving dismissively toward Gabriel's bassinet. That's more your department anyway. Women are naturally better at this nurturing thing. I was drowning in exhaustion and isolation, but whenever I tried to express my struggles, Vincent would turn it back on me. If I mentioned being tired, he'd remind me that at least I got to stay home while he dealt with demanding clients and impossible deadlines. If I said I was lonely, he'd point out that I had Gabriel for company and suggest that maybe I was being too dependent on other people for my happiness. This is what you wanted, he'd say, when I tried to talk about feeling overwhelmed. You wanted a baby. You wanted to be a mother. Now you have it, and you're complaining? My maternity leave from Maplewood Elementary was supposed to be a time of bonding and adjustment, but instead, it became a period of growing clarity about who Vincent really was and what my life had become. Without the distraction of work and with hours of quiet time while Gabriel slept, I began to see patterns I'd been too busy or too hopeful to recognize before. I started keeping a journal, partly to track Gabriel's feeding and sleeping schedule, but increasingly to document the things Vincent said and did that made me feel crazy. Writing it down helped me see that I wasn't being oversensitive or hormonal. I was living with someone who had weaponized my love for him against me. The isolation was deliberate, I realized. Vincent had gradually pulled me away from my support systems by making me feel guilty for spending time with anyone other than him and Gabriel. When Carmen invited me for lunch, he'd remind me about the household tasks that needed to be done. When my parents offered to babysit so I could get out of the house, he'd suggest that maybe I shouldn't be so eager to abandon my responsibilities as a mother. Good mothers don't need breaks from their children, he said when I mentioned wanting to attend my friend Sarah's birthday dinner. If you're already looking for excuses to get away from Gabriel, maybe you should think about whether you're really cut out for this. But Gabriel became my lifeline in ways Vincent never anticipated. Holding my son, watching him discover his tiny hands and feet, seeing his first smiles. It reminded me of what unconditional love actually felt like. Gabriel didn't judge me for having bad days or needing help. He didn't make me earn his affection or prove my worthiness. He just loved me, completely and purely, in a way that highlighted how twisted my relationship with his father had become. During those long days alone together, I started talking to Gabriel about everything. I'd tell him about my students at school, about his grandparents and Aunt Carmen, about the books I was reading and the songs I wanted to teach him when he was older. I'd apologize for the tension in our house and promise him that I would figure out how to make things better. "You deserve better than this," I'd whisper as I rocked him to sleep. "You deserve a home where people are kind to each other, where love doesn't come with conditions." It was during one of these conversations, when Gabriel was about 4 months old, that I finally admitted out loud what I'd been afraid to think. "Mommy needs to leave Daddy," I said, the words hanging in the air like a confession. "I don't know how yet, but we can't stay here." The decision didn't come all at once. It built slowly, through accumulated moments of clarity that cut through the fog of manipulation Vincent had created. Like the day I called him crying because Gabriel had a fever and I didn't know if I should take him to the emergency room, and Vincent's response was irritation that I was interrupting his workday with minor parenting decisions. Or the evening when Gabriel had been fussy all day and I was at my breaking point, and Vincent came home to find me crying on the kitchen floor while the baby screamed in his bouncer. Instead of helping, he stepped over us to get a beer from the refrigerator and said, "This is exactly why I don't rush home from work anymore." Or the night when Gabriel's cries woke us both up, and instead of helping with the feeding, Vincent shoved me out of bed and said, "Handle it. Some of us have real jobs to get to in the morning." Each incident was like another piece of a puzzle clicking into place, showing me a picture I'd been afraid to see clearly. Vincent didn't just dislike the demands of fatherhood. He resented Gabriel's existence. He saw our son as competition. For my attention, an inconvenience that had disrupted his life. A burden he hadn't really wanted despite all his talk about building a family together. But the moment that changed everything was when Gabriel was 5 months old and started reaching for Vincent when he walked through the door. My heart broke, watching my son's face light up with recognition and love for his father, only to see Vincent ignore him completely or hand him back to me within seconds. "He's too clingy," Vincent would say when Gabriel would cry if he put him down. "You're making him too dependent on attention. He needs to learn that the world doesn't revolve around him." Gabriel was a baby, a 5-month-old baby who just wanted love and connection from his father. But Vincent spoke about him like he was a manipulative adult, rather than a child who needed nurturing and affection. That's when I knew for certain that staying would damage Gabriel in ways that might never heal. I could survive Vincent's emotional abuse. I'd been doing it for over a year, but I couldn't let my son grow up thinking that cold indifference was what love looked like. I started planning in secret during Gabriel's naps. I researched apartment listings, calculated how much money I'd need for a security deposit, looked into daycare options for when I returned to work. I called legal aid services to ask about custody arrangements and divorce procedures. I opened a bank account that Vincent didn't know about and started saving every penny I could from the small amounts of cash my parents would slip me when they visited. The hardest part was accepting that I couldn't save Vincent or our relationship. For so long, I'd believed that if I just tried harder, loved better, demanded less, he would remember who he used to be. But I finally understood that the charming, attentive man I'd fallen in love with had never been real. He'd been a performance, designed to get me invested enough that leaving would feel impossible. I also started reaching out to the people Vincent had systematically isolated me from. I called Carmen and told her the truth about what was happening at home. I reconnected with my friend Sarah and asked if she still had space in her life for someone who'd been absent for too long. I started being honest with my parents about why I seemed sad and distant whenever they visited. "Mija," my mother said during one of these conversations, "you don't have to stay because you have a baby together. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do for your child is show them what it looks like to choose yourself." But even as I planned and prepared, I was terrified. Vincent controlled our finances, our social connections, our living situation. He'd spent 2 years convincing me that I was too emotional, too needy, too difficult for anyone else to love. What if he was right? What if I couldn't make it on my own with a baby? Then Gabriel started laughing, real belly-deep giggles that filled our quiet house with pure joy. And I realized that this beautiful, innocent child deserved to grow up in a home where laughter wasn't rare, where love wasn't conditional, where the people who were supposed to protect him actually did. I didn't know exactly how I was going to leave yet, but I knew I was going to find a way. For Gabriel. For the woman I used to be before Vincent convinced me I was broken. For the future I wanted both of us to have. The planning phase was almost over. Soon, I'd have to find the courage to actually walk away from the life I'd built with Vincent and trust that whatever came next would be better than what we were leaving behind. The divorce papers arrived on a Tuesday morning in late September, when Gabriel was 18 months old, and I'd been living in my own apartment for 6 months. I'd finally found the courage to leave Vincent the previous March, moving into a small 2-bedroom place on Oak Street with help from my parents and Carmen. The separation had been messy, with Vincent alternating between attempts to win me back and threats about what he'd do if I tried to take his son away from him. But seeing those official documents from Harrison, Mitchell and Associates made everything feel terrifyingly real. Vincent had filed first, and his petition painted a picture of me that I barely recognized. According to his lawyer's carefully crafted narrative, I was an unstable woman who had abandoned the family home, kidnapped our child, and was attempting to alienate Gabriel from his father. The custody arrangement he was proposing was even worse than I'd feared. Vincent wanted primary physical custody, with me getting supervised visitation every other weekend. Supervised. Like I was a danger to my own son. The woman who had spent every night for 18 months rocking Gabriel back to sleep when he had nightmares, who knew exactly which songs calmed him when he was fussy, who had never missed a pediatrician appointment or forgotten to give him his vitamins. I called my lawyer, Jennifer Walsh, immediately. She'd been recommended by the legal aid office and was taking my case pro bono, but I could tell she was overwhelmed with clients and couldn't give my situation the attention it deserved. "Diana, I'm not going to lie to you," Jennifer said during our phone call. "Vincent's lawyer is Thomas Mitchell. He's expensive, he's aggressive, and he knows how to work the system. We're going to have an uphill battle, especially since Vincent has the financial advantage and hasn't been accused of any criminal behavior." "But he was emotionally abusive," I protested. "He neglected Gabriel. He manipulated me for years. Emotional. Abuse is hard to prove in family court," Jennifer interrupted gently. "Unless you have documentation, recordings, witnesses to specific incidents, it often comes down to he said, she said. And judges tend to favor the parent who appears more stable and financially secure." That's when she told me about the custody evaluation that had been ordered. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, a child psychologist, would be interviewing both Vincent and me, observing our interactions with Gabriel, and visiting our respective homes to assess our parenting capabilities. This evaluation will heavily influence the judge's decision, Jennifer explained. You need to be prepared for Dr. Martinez to ask difficult questions, and you need to present yourself as calm, rational, and focused on Gabriel's best interests, not on your anger toward Vincent. The first evaluation session was scheduled for the following week at Dr. Martinez's office on Maple Avenue. I spent days preparing, reading articles about custody evaluations, practicing answers to questions I thought she might ask. I wanted to be ready to advocate for myself and Gabriel, to show that despite Vincent's financial advantages and expensive lawyer, I was the parent who truly knew and cared for our son. Gabriel and I arrived at Dr. Martinez's office 15 minutes early. She was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a gentle manner that immediately put Gabriel at ease. Her office was filled with toys and books, and Gabriel gravitated toward a set of wooden blocks while Dr. Martinez and I talked. "Tell me about your relationship with Gabriel," she began, making notes on a yellow legal pad. I told her about our daily routines, the songs we sang together, the way Gabriel would bring me his favorite books to read over and over again. I explained how he'd started saying "mama" when he was 10 months old, how he still crawled into my bed during thunderstorms, how he giggled when I made funny voices for the characters in his bedtime stories. Dr. Martinez watched carefully as Gabriel played, occasionally asking him gentle questions. "Who do you live with, sweetheart?" she asked at one point. "Mama," Gabriel said simply, building a tower with his blocks. "Mama and me. Do you see your daddy?" Gabriel's expression grew more serious. "Sometimes. Daddy has a big house." I held my breath, wondering what else he might say, but Gabriel seemed more interested in his blocks than in talking about Vincent. After about an hour, Dr. Martinez walked us to the waiting room where Vincent was sitting with his lawyer, Thomas Mitchell. Vincent was wearing his most charming smile, the one that had fooled me for so long, and when Gabriel saw him, he ran over cautiously. "Hey, buddy," Vincent said, picking Gabriel up and tossing him lightly in the air. Gabriel laughed, but I noticed how quickly Vincent set him down, how his attention immediately shifted back to his phone. I watched my session with Vincent through the window of Dr. Martinez's office while I waited in the lobby with Thomas Mitchell, who made small talk that felt more like interrogation. Vincent was animated and engaging with Dr. Martinez, no doubt spinning his version of events with the same charismatic confidence that had initially attracted me to him. When Gabriel's session with Vincent was over, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. Gabriel came out of the office looking subdued, not the happy, relaxed child who had played enthusiastically during our session. He ran straight to me and buried his face in my legs. "How did it go?" I asked Vincent, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Great," Vincent said, that fake smile never wavering. "Gabriel and I had a wonderful time talking with Dr. Martinez about our relationship. Didn't we, buddy?" Gabriel didn't respond, just held onto my hand tighter. Over the next few weeks, Dr. Martinez conducted individual interviews with both Vincent and me, visited our homes, and spoke with Gabriel's pediatrician, daycare teachers, and other people in his life. I felt cautiously optimistic after her visit to my apartment, where Gabriel clearly felt comfortable and showed her his room, his toys, his favorite books. But my confidence was shaken when Carmen told me that Vincent had been asking mutual friends and neighbors questions about my mental state, my parenting abilities, my fitness as a mother. He was building a case, gathering ammunition to use against me. He asked Mrs. Peterson if she'd ever heard Gabriel crying at unusual hours. Carmen reported after running into one of our former neighbors. "He's trying to paint you as neglectful or unstable." The custody evaluation process dragged on for 2 months, during which time I had to maintain a normal life for Gabriel, while constantly wondering if every interaction, every decision, every moment of tiredness or frustration might be used against me later. I felt like I was performing motherhood instead of just living it. Then, on a Friday afternoon in November, Jennifer called with news that changed everything. "Diana, Dr. Martinez wants to meet with you and Gabriel one more time," she said. "But there's something different about this appointment. She's asked that you bring something called a comfort item for Gabriel, and she wants to record the session." "Record it? Why?" "She says she wants to capture Gabriel's natural responses to some questions she has for him. Apparently, during his last session with Vincent, Gabriel said something that raised some concerns for her." My heart started racing. What kind of concerns? She wouldn't give me details, but she mentioned that Gabriel had been inconsistent in his responses about his father, and she wants to create a record of his unfiltered reactions. I spent the weekend wondering what Gabriel might have said to Dr. Martinez, what inconsistencies she had noticed. Gabriel seemed normal, happy, playful, affectionate, but I knew he was more perceptive than most adults gave him credit for. At 18 months, he might not have the words to articulate complex emotions, but he felt everything deeply. On Monday morning, as we prepared for what Dr. Martinez had called our final evaluation session, Gabriel picked up a small digital voice recorder that I'd been using to capture his first words and cute pronunciations to share with my parents. He'd become fascinated with the device, often asking to hear Gabe talk when I played back recordings of his babbling and early speech attempts. "Mama, bring this?" he asked, holding up the recorder. I almost said no. Dr. Martinez had asked for a comfort item like a stuffed animal or blanket. But something in Gabriel's expression made me pause. He'd been carrying that little recorder around for weeks, pressing the buttons and listening to his own voice. If it comforted him, maybe it would help him feel more relaxed during what I hoped would be our final evaluation. "Okay, sweetheart," I said, dropping the recorder into the diaper bag. "We can bring your talking machine." I had no idea that this small decision, this moment of saying yes to my toddler's innocent request, would end up exposing truths that no amount of expensive legal maneuvering could hide. I had no idea that Gabriel, in his simple, honest way, was about to become the most powerful witness in our custody case. As we drove to Dr. Martinez's office that morning, I thought this was just another step in a long legal process. I didn't know I was about to discover that my 18-month-old son had been documenting his father's behavior in his own childlike way, creating evidence that would change the entire trajectory of our case. The truth was about to come out, delivered, in the innocent voice of a toddler who just wanted both his parents to love him the way he deserved to be loved. Dr. Martinez's office felt different that Monday morning. There was an electricity in the air, a sense that something important was about to happen. Gabriel seemed to feel it too. He was quieter than usual, more observant, clutching his little voice recorder like it was a security blanket. "Good morning, Diana." "Hello, Gabriel," Dr. Martinez said, her voice gentler than I'd heard it during our previous sessions. "Thank you both for coming in today. This will be our final evaluation session." She led us into her office where I noticed a video camera had been set up on a tripod, pointing toward the play area where Gabriel usually gravitated. "As I mentioned to your attorney, I'd like to record today's session. Is that all right with you?" I nodded, my mouth suddenly dry. "Of course. Whatever you think is best." Gabriel went straight to his favorite wooden blocks, but I could see him glancing at the camera with curiosity rather than fear. Dr. Martinez sat down near him, her clipboard on her lap, but her attention fully focused on my son. "Gabriel, sweetheart, I have some questions for you today. Is that okay?" "Okay," Gabriel said simply, stacking blocks with careful concentration. "Can you tell me about your mama?" Dr. Martinez asked. Gabriel's face lit up immediately. "Mama sings to Gabe. Mama makes pancakes. Mama reads books." He pointed to a picture book on Dr. Martinez's shelf. "Mama reads that one, about the bunny." "That sounds wonderful. What about your daddy? Can you tell me about Daddy?" Gabriel's hands stilled on the blocks. His expression became more serious, more guarded. "Daddy has big house," he said quietly. "You like visiting Daddy's house?" Gabriel didn't answer right away. Instead, he picked up his voice recorder and held it close to his chest. "Daddy gets mad," he said finally, so quietly I almost didn't hear him. Dr. Martinez leaned forward slightly. "Daddy gets mad? Can you tell me more about that?" Gabriel looked at me, then back at Dr. Martinez, with the matter-of-fact honesty that only toddlers possess, he said. "Daddy says bad words about Mama." My heart stopped. In all the months of separation and legal proceedings, I'd never directly asked Gabriel what happened during his visitations with Vincent. I'd been so focused on not alienating him from his father, on being the good divorced parent who didn't badmouth her ex, that I'd never considered what Gabriel might be absorbing during those visits. "What kind of words does Daddy say, Doctor?" Martinez asked gently. Gabriel's bottom lip began to tremble. "Mean words. Daddy says Mama is—" He struggled for a moment, trying to remember something that was clearly too advanced for his vocabulary. "Daddy says Mama is crazy and... He looked frustrated, unable to find the words. That's when Gabriel did something that made my blood run cold. He pressed the play button on his voice recorder. Vincent's voice filled the room, clear and unmistakable. "Your mother is a manipulative bitch who's trying to steal you away from me." Dr. Martinez's pen froze mid-note. I felt like I was going to be sick, but Gabriel wasn't done. With the innocent efficiency of a child who had been doing this for weeks, he pressed the button again. "Mommy's crazy, buddy. She's not thinking clearly, because she's sick in the head." Another press. "If you tell anyone what Daddy says about Mommy, Daddy will be very, very sad." Another. "Mommy doesn't love you as much as Daddy does. That's why she took you away from our nice house." With each recording, I watched Dr. Martinez's professional composure crack a little more. These weren't just inappropriate comments. They were deliberate attempts to manipulate and emotionally abuse our toddler son. "Gabriel," Dr. Martinez said, her voice carefully controlled. "How long have you been recording these conversations?" Gabriel held up his small hand, trying to show numbers he didn't fully understand yet. "Lots of times. Gabe likes to hear Gabe talk, but sometimes Daddy talks too." My 18-month-old son had been accidentally documenting his father's psychological abuse. While playing with what he thought was just a toy, Gabriel had captured evidence of Vincent systematically trying to turn him against me, using language and concepts that no child should ever hear. Dr. Martinez reached for the recorder. "Gabriel, may I listen to more of your recordings?" Gabriel nodded and handed it over willingly. For the next 20 minutes, we sat in that office listening to Vincent's voice poison the air with his venom. Some recordings were from car rides, others from Vincent's house, a few from phone calls where Gabriel had apparently been playing nearby while Vincent talked to his lawyer or friends. The judge is going to see right through Diana's bullshit. She's unstable, emotional, exactly the kind of woman who shouldn't have primary custody. I'm going to destroy her in court. By the time I'm done, she'll be lucky to get supervised visits. Gabriel's better off without her constant drama anyway. Kids need stability, not some crazy woman who can't handle real life. But the worst recording was one where Vincent was apparently talking directly to Gabriel during a visitation. His voice was sickeningly sweet, the tone he used when he was manipulating someone. "Gabriel, you know Daddy loves you more than anything, right? More than Mommy loves you because Daddy works so hard to give you nice things. Mommy just wants to take you away from Daddy because she's angry and confused. But you don't want to live with angry, confused Mommy all the time, do you? You want to live with Daddy in the big house with all your toys." I could hear Gabriel's little voice in the background, unclear but obviously distressed. Then Vincent's voice again. "That's right, buddy. Daddy understands you better than Mommy does. Don't tell Mommy what we talked about, okay? It's our special secret." Dr. Martinez turned off the recorder and sat back in her chair, her professional mask completely gone. She looked shocked, angry, and deeply concerned. "Diana," she said quietly, "I need to ask you, did you know Gabriel was making these recordings?" "No," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "I had no idea. I gave him that recorder to capture his first words, his little songs. I never imagined Vincent would say things like that in front of him." Gabriel had moved closer to me during the playback of the recordings, sensing the tension in the room, even if he didn't fully understand what was happening. I pulled him into my lap, holding him protectively while trying to process what we'd just heard. "Gabriel," Dr. Martinez said gently, "you're very brave for sharing your recordings with us. You're not in trouble, and Daddy's not going to be sad with you for telling the truth." "Daddy says bad words," Gabriel repeated, resting his head against my shoulder. "Gabe doesn't like bad words about Mama." Dr. Martinez made several more notes, then looked directly at me. "Diana, I'm going to be recommending to the court that you be awarded primary physical custody of Gabriel, with Vincent receiving supervised visitation only. These recordings document a clear pattern of emotional abuse and parental alienation that is harmful to Gabriel's psychological development." I couldn't speak. After months of feeling like I was fighting an impossible battle, after being made to feel like I was the unstable one, the crazy one, the unfit parent, my own child had proven what I'd known all along. Vincent was the one who was dangerous to Gabriel's well-being. "What happens now?" I managed to ask. "I'll be filing my report with the court immediately, along with copies of these recordings. Given the severity of what Gabriel has documented, I expect Judge Holloway will want to review this evidence before your custody hearing next week." As we prepared to leave Dr. Martinez's office, Gabriel tugged on my sleeve. "Mama," he said. "Gabe, good boy?" I knelt down to his level, cupping his sweet face in my hands. "Yes, baby. You're the best boy. You're so brave and smart and good." I didn't tell him that his innocent desire to hear Gabe talk had just saved us both. I didn't explain that his accidental recordings had exposed his father's true nature in a way that no amount of testimony or legal arguments could have achieved. What I did know was that Gabriel's truth, spoken in his own voice, captured in his own innocent way, was about to echo through that courtroom and change everything. My son had become the witness neither Vincent nor his expensive lawyer had seen coming. And unlike the adults in this case, Gabriel's testimony couldn't be dismissed, discredited, or explained away. The truth, as they say, had come from the mouths of babes, and it was about to set us free. Judge Patricia Holloway's courtroom had never felt more silent than it did that Thursday morning when she called our case. The overhead lights seemed brighter, the wooden benches more imposing, and the weight of what was about to happen pressed down on everyone present. Vincent sat at the defendant's table with Thomas Mitchell, his expensive suit and confident posture a stark contrast to the nervous energy I could see in the way he kept adjusting his tie. I sat with Jennifer Walsh, Gabriel's voice recorder resting on the table between us like a small but powerful bomb. After Dr. Martinez had filed her emergency report with the court, Judge Holloway had fast-tracked our hearing. Word had spread through the legal community about the unprecedented nature of the evidence we were presenting. "This is highly unusual," Judge Holloway began, her reading glasses perched on her nose as she reviewed Dr. Martinez's report. "In 30 years on the family court bench, I have never encountered a case where an 18-month-old child has provided documented evidence of parental misconduct." Thomas Mitchell stood up, his voice smooth and practiced. "Your Honor, we respectfully request that these alleged recordings be excluded from evidence. The child in question is far too young to understand the implications of his actions, and there's no proof that these recordings haven't been manipulated or taken out of context." Judge Holloway's expression didn't change, but I could see something sharp in her eyes. "Mr. Mitchell, are you suggesting that an 18-month-old child orchestrated a sophisticated plan to frame his father?" "Of course not, Your Honor, but then, sit down." Her voice cut through the courtroom like a blade. Dr. Martinez has provided expert testimony that these recordings are authentic and were created spontaneously by the child during unsupervised visitation periods. The court will hear this evidence. For the next hour, Gabriel's innocent voice filled that courtroom with truths that Vincent had never expected to see the light of day. Each recording played was like watching Vincent's carefully constructed facade crumble in real time. The judge's expression grew more severe with each clip, while Vincent's face went from confident to pale to desperate. When the final recording ended, the one where Vincent told Gabriel that, "Daddy understands you better than Mommy does," and instructed him to keep their conversations secret, Judge Holloway removed her glasses and looked directly at Vincent. "Mr. Carrera," she said, her voice carrying the weight of decades of legal experience, "I have heard testimony from parents who have neglected their children, abused their children, and abandoned their children. But in all my years on this bench, I have rarely encountered someone who has so systematically attempted to psychologically manipulate a toddler against the child's other parent." Vincent stood up, his voice shaking slightly. "Your Honor, I love my son. Everything I did was because I was trying to protect him from what, Mr. Carrera? From a mother who has consistently provided him with stability, affection, and age-appropriate care? From a woman whose only crime appears to be leaving a relationship where she was being emotionally abused?" The courtroom was so quiet you could hear the air conditioning humming. Vincent's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, while Thomas Mitchell shuffled through papers as if looking for a legal miracle that didn't exist. "Furthermore," Judge Holloway continued, "the court is deeply concerned about your attempts to coach this child to keep secrets from his mother, your inappropriate discussions of adult relationship issues in his presence, and your deliberate efforts to undermine the parent-child bond between Gabriel and Ms. Reeves." She put her glasses back on and looked down at her notes. "The court finds that Mr. Carrera has demonstrated a pattern of behavior that is detrimental to the psychological well-being of the minor child. Ms. Reeves is hereby awarded primary physical and legal custody of Gabriel Carrera Reeves." I felt like I couldn't breathe. After months of fear, of wondering if a system designed to protect children would actually fail my son, justice was finally being served. Mr. Carrera will be granted supervised visitation, one afternoon per week, with supervision provided by the Millbrook County Family Services Department. These visits will continue only as long as Mr. Carrera participates in court-mandated counseling and parenting classes. Judge Holloway's gavel came down with a finality that echoed through the courtroom. Vincent sat heavily in his chair, his head in his hands, while Thomas Mitchell whispered urgently in his ear about appeals and legal options that we all knew wouldn't change what had just happened. As we gathered our papers to leave, Vincent approached me one last time. Gone was the charming smile, the confident swagger, the manipulative sweetness that had defined our relationship for so long. What remained was a man who had finally been seen for exactly who he was. "Diana," he said quietly, "I hope you're happy. You've destroyed our family." I looked at him for a long moment. This man who had spent years convincing me that I was the problem in our relationship, that my emotions were too much, that my expectations were unreasonable. The man who had tried to turn my own child against me and make me doubt my fitness as a mother. "Vincent," I said calmly, "I didn't destroy our family. I saved it." The months that followed the custody hearing were like learning to breathe again after holding my breath for years. Gabriel and I settled into a new routine in our little apartment on Oak Street, where we could laugh as loudly as we wanted, where music filled the rooms instead of tension, where bedtime stories weren't interrupted by angry voices from the next room. Gabriel thrived in ways that broke my heart and filled it simultaneously. Without the stress of Vincent's emotional manipulation, he became more talkative, more curious, more affectionate. He stopped having the nightmares that had plagued him during our time with Vincent. He stopped asking why Daddy was angry all the time. I returned to teaching at Maplewood Elementary that fall, and my students welcomed me back with handmade cards and enthusiastic hugs. Being in the classroom again, surrounded by children's laughter and creativity, reminded me of who I was beyond the labels Vincent had tried to assign me. I wasn't crazy or unstable or unfit. I was a good teacher, a loving mother, a woman who had found the courage to protect her child from harm. Vincent's supervised visits happened sporadically. Sometimes he'd show up, spend an awkward hour trying to engage with Gabriel under the watchful eye of a social worker, then leave looking frustrated and defeated. Other times he simply wouldn't appear, leaving Gabriel disappointed but increasingly accepting that Daddy wasn't someone he could count on. "Where's Daddy?" Gabriel asked one Saturday when Vincent failed to show up for his scheduled visit. "I don't know, sweetheart," I answered honestly. "But you know what? We're going to have a great day anyway. Just you and me." And we did. We went to Riverside Park, fed the ducks, played on the swings, and had a picnic lunch under the oak trees. Gabriel giggled and ran and showed me every interesting rock and leaf he found. As I watched him play, I realized that this was what childhood was supposed to look like: carefree, joyful, secure. Dr. Martinez continued to check in with us periodically, monitoring Gabriel's adjustment and ensuring that Vincent's absence wasn't causing him undue distress. "He's remarkably resilient," she told me during one of our follow-up appointments. "Children are incredibly adaptable when they're in safe, loving environments." "Sometimes I worry that I've deprived him of having a father," I admitted. Dr. Martinez shook her head firmly. "Diana, you didn't deprive Gabriel of a father. Vincent deprived himself of being a real father when he chose manipulation over love, control over connection. What you gave Gabriel was something far more valuable. You showed him that he deserves to be treated with kindness and respect." As Gabriel approached his second birthday, I started dating again, cautiously and carefully. I'd learned to recognize the warning signs of manipulation, to trust my instincts when something felt off, to value my own worth enough not to settle for less than I deserved. When I met David, a fellow teacher who made me laugh and treated Gabriel with genuine affection, I knew I was ready to open my heart again. This time to someone who saw my strength rather than trying to exploit my vulnerabilities. The legal battle officially ended when Vincent stopped pursuing his appeals and moved to California for a new job. He sends Gabriel birthday cards and Christmas presents, but the visits have stopped entirely. Sometimes I feel sad about that, not for Vincent, but for Gabriel, who will grow up without knowing his biological father. But then I remember those recordings, the poison Vincent was feeding our toddler son, and I know we're better off. If you're listening to this story and seeing yourself in my experiences, if you're wondering whether what you're enduring is really abuse or if you're being too sensitive, let me tell you something I wish someone had told me years ago. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. If someone is making you question your own sanity, your own worth, your own perceptions of reality, that's not love. That's manipulation. You don't have to stay because you have children together. You don't have to endure emotional abuse because someone provides financial security. You don't have to accept crumbs of affection because you're afraid you don't deserve better. Your children are watching. They're absorbing every interaction, every harsh word, every moment of tension. Even when you think they're too young to understand, they're learning what love looks like, what relationships should feel like, what they should expect from the people who claim to care about them. Gabriel saved us both with his innocent honesty, but you don't need a smoking gun or a recording device or dramatic courtroom evidence to make the choice to prioritize your well-being and that of your children. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply walk away from someone who makes you feel small. Today, Gabriel is a happy, confident 4-year-old who tells me jokes and builds elaborate block castles and believes that he can grow up to be anything he wants. He doesn't remember the toxic atmosphere of those early years, but he knows he's loved unconditionally. He knows his voice matters. He knows he's safe. And me? I'm not the woman Vincent told me I was. Too much, too emotional, too difficult to love. I'm the woman who fought for her child and won. I'm the woman who rebuilt her life from scratch and discovered she was stronger than she ever imagined. I'm the woman who chose herself and her son over the familiar comfort of accepting less than she deserved. If my story resonates with you, if you're still finding your courage, or if you've already taken those first brave steps toward freedom, I want you to know that you're not alone. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment telling me about your own journey. Or simply say, I'm still fighting. I read every single one. And remember, sometimes the smallest voices carry the biggest truths. Listen to them. Listen to yourself. And never stop believing that you and your children deserve better. The truth will always find a way to be heard. Even if it comes from the innocent heart of a child playing with a toy recorder, speaking love, in the face of lies. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.